Look at that. You have found Sonic Safety again, or maybe for the first time. Regardless, I'm extremely happy that you're listening, or maybe you're watching. This is on YouTube as well. So if you're watching, hello. If you're just listening, hello. I guess you say hello in both of those kind of situations. But Sonic Safety is your podcast where we talk about transportation safety. And if you have been listening since the beginning, which has only been 2 episodes, you know that I had another podcast before this and rebranded it now to Sonic Safety. But the nice thing is that my sponsor, who was sponsoring my previous show, is also sponsoring this one, and that just happens to be Ewing Safety and Industrial. So here's the deal. You might be saying, what exactly is Ewing Safety and Industrial? Well, lucky for you, I'm here to talk to you about them. They've got everything, okay, guys? They've got anything that has to do with safety or industrial. It's a very clever name. But if you need anything when it comes to like nuts and bolts and screws, they got all the line of Brighton Best International over there. All nuts, all washers, all American made. So if you need anything like that, make sure that you hit up my friends down there at Ewing Safety. You can visit them in Morris, Illinois, if you're in the area, or you can go online at ewingsafety.com. They've got it all for you. Make sure you tell them that I said hi. So, moving on, last week we talked about acute violations. Okay, what acute violations are, what the top 10 ones were of 2024, how they find that stuff out, how the FMCSA finds that stuff out. They're the ones that put the report out, is when they're doing audits of companies. Okay, they do it. They come in, they do an audit. There's multiple reasons why a company could go through an audit. And it seems to be that a lot of people get nervous with them, which I understand, because audits can be nerve-wracking a little bit, especially if you're not 100% sure on what you've done. But if you need help with an audit, or you're saying, hey, I don't want to get audited, I think I'm doing good, but I might not be. Here's the deal. You don't have to panic, okay? You can reach out to me at wattsman.com. Or you can just email me, sam@wattsman.com, and I can help you out with that, okay? That is what I do. I'm an independent safety and compliance guy. I will come in and see how you are looking when it comes to safety and compliance. And as an added bonus, I'll come in and take a look at how you're doing. And if there are issues that need to be addressed or fixed, I can help you out with those as well. I don't like to come in and just say, hey, you need to do this, this, and this, and be done with it. I come in and I say, hey, this is wrong. Don't worry, I can help you out with that. So visit my website, wattsman.com, if you are nervous about audits, or if you just want to say, where are we at? How's our safety compliance looking as a company? I'm more than happy to come on in there and see how you're doing with that as well. So wattsman.com, make sure you check it out if you need any help when it comes to safety or compliance for your transportation company. Now, today we're going to be doing a part 2, basically, of the violations talk. Last week we talked about acute violations, which in layman's terms, acute violations are you have something big that needs to be stopped immediately and needs to be corrected. I got a ladybug on my microphone. It's the dead of winter. You thought that the ladybugs would be gone, but no. They're still here. Don't worry. I took care of it in a humane way. But anyway, so an acute violation. So that's basically letting a driver drive without a CDL, not having a drug and alcohol consortium in play. That's acute violations. That's stuff that DOT will come in and say, hey, you got to fix that right now, bud. Critical violations are a tad different, but not incredibly different. They're more pattern-like, if that makes any sense. So a critical violation is something where DOT will come in and say, hey, we've noticed that this has been going this way. You've been trending in this way. You need to correct this, or you're going to have some serious consequences with that. So that is if drivers are having issues correctly filling out their e-logs or something like that. It's critical violations are more pattern-like. Does that make sense? hopefully that makes sense. Acute violations are big event, got to stop everything and fix it. Critical violations are, you're doing this wrong. You need to correct this, but you got a pattern of doing this thing wrong. So hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, there's a lot of legal language that can kind of define both of them, but I'm not going to get into that because remember what I said in the first episode. My one goal of this is to entertain as well as inform. And sometimes you just don't need the legalese language. You just need to know that acute means you got a big issue you need to solve quickly, and critical means there's a pattern going on that you need to put an end to. So both of them, by the way, you don't want, okay? It's not like one's better than the other, really. They're both violations. Both of them can get you into a conditional rating, and both of them have the potential to shut your company down. So you really don't want either of them. So anyways, but the FMCSA was kind enough to put together their list of the top 10 critical violations for the year of 2024. Again, they got this list from when they go in and do an audit. Now, you could get audited a couple different ways. If your CSA data is above thresholds, and we're going to get into that in a later podcast because that could be its own subject. Or if you want, you can go back, listen to some old trucking safety podcasts. I think I went through that a little bit in there as well. But again, to simplify it, there's 7 different categories that the CSA grades trucking companies on. And as long as you're not over the threshold that they deem is, too much, then they're not really going to look at you. But if you start going over the threshold in a couple of those categories, the DOT is going to come in and say, why are you guys getting more violations on roadside inspections than others in these categories? So that's usually the most common way that DOT will come in and do an audit on your company. A couple of the other ways are if they get like a complaint. There's sometimes that they'll get numerous complaints about something with your carrier. Then they might want to kind of look into it as well. So you just want to make sure. The other big thing is if you get into a major accident, DOT could sometimes come in and take a look at your operations, especially if you're at fault. And especially if it included fatalities and stuff like that. The worse the accident, the more likely DOT is going to come in and just see how your trucking company is being operated, making sure that you're operating it in a safe way. And if you're not, that's when the violations come into play. So we've got the top 10 critical violations for 2024. And just like what we did with the acute violations, we're just going to go 1 through 10. Okay. I'll break them down for you. And yeah, because you're not going to care. It's not like a top 10 list that you're eagerly waiting on number 1. It's just 1 through 10. We're just going to do that. So the number 1 critical violation for 2024 was false reports of records of duty status. Basically, you did your e-logs wrong. That's what that basically breaks down to, is that you didn't keep good track of your logs. So there's a couple different things that could fall into a false report of record duty status. The most common one that I see a lot is drivers using personal conveyance in an incorrect way. That just seems to be the biggest one. A lot of drivers aren't going to try to drive off duty. A lot of the e-logs won't even let you do it. A lot of them have it to the point where if your truck is moving, it's going to kick you into something. It's going to kick you into drive, most likely. But there are the features in there. You have yard move and you have personal conveyance, which a lot of companies allow their drivers to do. There's some that don't allow them to do it. But personal conveyance, if you kick yourself into that and you get caught when you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing under personal conveyance, that is one of the most common false reports of record of duty status that I have seen out there. It's drivers trying to say that they're not technically working while they're actually working. Because if you kick yourself into personal conveyance, it leaves you off duty and you're able to drive. Because it's put out there for drivers to use their trucks in a personal manner. So, I'm not going to get too much into the details on this episode because next week's episode is actually going to deal on personal conveyance because there's a lot of gray area when it comes to that. And there's a lot of misunderstandings when it comes to personal conveyance. So I figured with the next episode, because of this, it would be a great time to go over what personal conveyance actually is and is not. Because again, I talked to numerous drivers that are 100% sure that they know what PC is and how to use it correctly, and they are most likely 98% of the time wrong. And I don't mean that in a negative way or a mean way. Like I said, there's a lot of gray area when it comes to personal conveyance. And a lot of guys talk to each other and they think they know what's what, and it just isn't true. So I've sat through enough webinars and seminars about PC that I think I have a pretty good understanding of it. So we're going to get into that in the next episode. But that is the number one use or violation for the 2024 critical violation is the false report of records of duty status. There are some times too when if a DOT officer really wants to get into it, and there is even some legal shadiness with this, but if you're taking an 8-hour break or a 10-hour break in your bunk and you put yourself in off duty, I have heard, I've never seen this, but I have heard from other safety professionals that one of their drivers was getting into trouble because they were off duty, but they were technically in the sleeper berth. And so the DOT officer wanted to see some receipts of of hotels and stuff like that. Again, I can't verify that. It wasn't my guy. It was stuff I heard. But if you're going to be sleeping in the back of your truck, put yourself in sleeper berth. Don't do off duty, even though they do the same thing. They both, put you off duty, but just try to keep it somewhat accurate. So if you're in your sleeper berth, throw yourself into sleeper berth. But that's the number one violation that they found was a false reports of records of duty status. Now, number two, not using the appropriate method to record hours of duty statuses. So there's exemptions out there that if you don't go past the 150 air miles, which I think is roughly like 172 actual miles, something like that, you don't have to have an E-log in your truck. There's also the exemption of if your truck is older than a 1999, you don't have to have an you don't have to have an E-log system in there. There's a couple other, kind of obscure exemptions too that I'm sure fall into there, but that's kind of the two big ones. And sometimes guys like to try to skirt around that. Or they don't want to use the E-log system that is in there, or they say their E-log system is quote unquote broken, and so they're running paper logs. That all could fall under not using the appropriate method. If you're going to be an over-the-road truck driver, you need to use electronic logs. Okay. The other thing that I've seen is an over-the-road driver will drive over the road during the week, and then on the weekend, he'll do local runs. So he's like, hey, I don't have to record this on my E-log because I'm not going outside the 150. So they just run paper logs or even timesheets with that, when in reality, they're just skirting the system. And you might not get caught on the day, but you can't do that. And you will eventually get caught in the form of, like I said, an audit here where they did catch these guys. But what my guess is, because they don't really break it down, my guess is that you've got local guys that are going outside the 150 air mile, and you've got over-the-road guys that just aren't using the E-log system how they should be. So if you do need to use an E-log, make sure that you understand how to use it. And if you don't know how to use it, make sure you ask your dispatcher or your operations manager how to use that, because it is extremely important that you use the E-log system that comes in your truck if you're going over the road. Now, number three, this one kind of blew my mind a little bit. Using a driver before receiving a pre-employment result. So obviously, if you hire on a new driver at a trucking company, they have to do a pre-employment drug test. And you got to wait for that drug test to come back before you can put them in the truck. That is kind of simple. In fact, all the times I've ever done it, I've given it to them, well before they're even ready to come into orientation. If they say, yeah, I'm ready to go, I'll give them the drug test, and then I haven't even scheduled the orientation yet until I get the result of that back. Apparently, there are some companies out there that are putting drivers in trucks before they even get the pre-employment drug test back. That is a massive no-no, not only from the eyes of the DOT and the FMCSA, but you are putting a driver into your equipment and you're going to let them pull your shipper or your customer's freight. Like, you don't even know the person yet. Like, you know, you're going to give them 80,000 pounds worth of everything and potentially millions of dollars worth of freight in the back there. And you don't even know if they can pass a drug test. Like, that's just incredibly irresponsible. I can't imagine doing something like that. But apparently, a lot of people do it because that's number 3 on the critical violation. So, if you're going to hire a driver, make sure that they pass their pre-employment drug test before you even think about putting them in a truck. Make sense? Hopefully it does. That one should make a lot of sense. Number 4, requiring or permitting drivers to drive after 15 hours on duty. So that's more of a local one there. There are some exemptions when it comes to local hours of duty. Excuse me there. But basically that's saying a driver has to take X amount of time for a break. And there are times, especially when it comes to local stuff, that they don't want to. And companies don't want them to as well because, you know, time is money. I get that. But you got to have the driver's rest. Even if the driver says, hey, I'm good to go, DOT put those rest breaks out there for a reason. It's for a safety reason. So make sure that you are not mandating drivers go out when they're not well rested, okay? Get them the rest that they deserve, and then you can let them go on out there. Okay, number 5, allowing driver to operate with the suspended/revoked CDL. Hey, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? That was number 1 on the acute violation. And you might be saying, well, why is it on the acute and on the critical? And to be honest with you, I don't know. I don't know how it appears on both. My guess, and this is just a guess, and maybe some safety person who knows more about this than I do can fill me in. But my guess is that on the acute violation, it has more to do with the driver, with the time on how long that driver's not had a CDL or has maybe never had a CDL, you know, and they're just behind the wheel, but they've never gone through class, they've never gone through training to get a CDL, versus a critical where maybe the CDL got suspended because they forgot to self-certify their med card or they have child support payments that they're behind on. Both of that can get your CDL suspended. So my guess, if I was going to take a guess, my guess is the critical violation of that is they have a CDL, but it got suspended for some reason that had nothing to do with driving. And the acute violation is they've never had a CDL or their CDL got revoked because of a massive accident or something like that. That'd be my guess. But regardless, it's important to have a CDL, okay? If you're going to get behind the wheel of one of these big trucks, you got to know how to drive that thing. Training is important. Understanding, excuse me, I'm kind of coming off of a cold here, so that's why I might have a little bit of buildup here. Also might be why my voice sounds a little more radio-y today. But if you're going to have a driver in the driver's seat, they got to understand how that truck works. They got to understand how to do a proper pre-trip, to what to look for. They got to understand how much space they need to turn that thing around. So regardless of why they don't have a license, you need to make sure that the drivers you put in your vehicles have a CDL that is in good standing, okay? All right, so number 6 now. Inquiries into driving record not kept in a DQ file. DQ files are driver qualification files, is what they're called. All of us in the biz call them DQ files, or even the cooler ones call them DQFs. But driver qualification files, that is the file that you have in your office or on your computer that has all the information needed for the FMCSA requires certain information to be in there. You need to have an application. You need to have a copy of the driver's CDL. You need to have a copy of their med card, stuff like that. There's other things too that go in there. But what this is saying is that they don't have, the trucking company doesn't have what they need in their DQ file. This is a pretty common violation. And this is one that unfortunately a lot of companies commit just because they don't know that they don't have what they need in there. You know, they don't know what they need in there to begin with. So this is where someone like me comes in. I say, let me see your DQ files. I know what I'm looking for. I know what I should see. And if it's not in there, all the information is pretty easy to obtain. You just got to obtain it. So if you're wondering if you have any issues with your DQ files, feel free to reach out to me, sam@wattsman.com, and I can come in and take a look at them. But make sure that you do have everything you need in the DQ files, and then you won't have this violation issue. All right, number 7, we're getting there. Driving beyond 11-hour driving limit in a 14-hour period. So this has to do with over-the-road driving. Each driver can drive for 11 hours in a day. Then they got to take a break. Okay, they can work for 14 hours a day, meaning that if they need to unload or load a truck or do something, they can do that. But they can only drive 11 hours in the day. If they drive over 11 hours, then they are committing a violation. And this is where kind of that critical violation piece falls in, because if you have one day where you accidentally drove over by 20 minutes or so, DOT is not going to really care too much about that. But if they come in and they notice a pattern of your driver driving over 11 hours, that's when they're going to start to hit you with the violations. And those violations can be costly too. I mean, you're talking about thousands of dollars a day in violations when it comes to that stuff. So make sure that your drivers are abiding by the rules of the DOT and are only driving 11 hours in the day. If you notice that they are having a problem going over, you need to train them on that, okay? And you need to document that training. That's the biggest piece. Make sure you document. You inspect what you expect, okay? Document what you talk to them about so that if DOT comes back and says, hey, you got this guy here, you can say, look, we've trained him 3 times. Maybe it's time to cut the cord. I don't know. But make sure that when you got drivers out there, they're only driving the 11 hours that they should be. All right, number 8. All right. Failing to preserve supporting documents for 6 months. So this goes, there's a couple things that you need to keep on hand up to 6 months, even after the driver is gone. You need to keep on hand with them. Some of these documents are in the driver qualification files. Some of these documents are paper logs. There are some exceptions when a driver can run a paper log. And if they do that, you need to make sure that you have a copy of that stuff and can produce that copy should DOT want to come in and see them. So make sure that you're hanging on to documents. It can get a little complicated. So I'd highly recommend getting a cheat sheet on that, and you can Google that stuff of how long you need to keep certain documents for, because some you only need to keep 6 months, some you need to keep up to 2 years. So make sure that you're keeping everything that you need to, because DOT, even if the driver's no longer there, the driver left a year ago, DOT is still going to expect you to have some paperwork on that driver. So make sure that you have that at the ready. All right, number 9. Number 9 and number 10 kind of go along with each other. So we'll kind of do both of them at the same time. So this is 9 and this is 10. Failing to do a random alcohol or drug test at applicable annual rate. Okay? So if you're an over-the-road driver, you should have your drivers in a drug and alcohol consortium. The reason they break it down is because it's 2 separate tests. Alcohol test is one thing, drug test is one thing. Like if you get a notice of a random, there will be times where it's just a drug random, or there's times where it's just an alcohol random, or there's times where it's both. Okay, the DOT treats drugs and alcohol separately. And so sometimes you got to test for both, sometimes it's just one of them. But if you do get that, if you get a random or if you have to go in for a drug test, you need to make sure you take that seriously. And here's the other thing too that I want to point out with carriers is if you get randoms for your drivers, you need to make sure that you get those drivers in for their randoms, okay? If you don't, that's the same as a driver refusing a drug test. And if you remember, that is one of the violations on the acute category is driver refusing to do a drug test. If you don't get your driver in for his random, that is the same as a driver refusing a drug test. And a lot of times drivers are not happy about that because they didn't even know they had a random. And all of a sudden they get hit for this refusal, but they didn't even know that they had it. So take the drugs and alcohol consortium very seriously, okay? Because the DOT does. And quite frankly, they should. That's a very serious offense. There are drivers out on the road that maybe shouldn't be on the road because they have a drug or an alcohol problem, okay? And that's a scary thing to think about, but it's true. So when it comes to drug testing, pre-employment drug testing, random drug testing, return to duty drug testing, if they already tested positive for drugs at one time, you need to make sure you take that stuff extremely seriously. So that is it, all right? That is a top 10 critical violations of 2024. Thanks to our friends over at the FMCSA for putting that list out. If you have questions about any of those, feel free to reach out to me, okay? If you're like, hey, I don't know if we're doing this right, man, that's what I'm here for, okay? I'm here to help you guys out with that stuff. Again, sam@wattsman.com, all right? That's how you can get a hold of me if you have questions about critical or acute violation. So next week, we are going to talk about personal conveyance. I know everyone's favorite topic, but there is a lot of information in there that you need to understand. And if you don't, you could wind up with some of these violations. And like I said, they can be kind of costly if you're committing them over and over and over again. So that'll do it for Sonic Safety. I want to thank you, Ewing Safety, again, for their continued support of the show. Really great people. Go visit them at ewingsafety.com. And I'm going to leave you with this. Proverbs 1, verse 7. It says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." Hey, how's that for convicting, huh? Make sure that you're chasing after that good knowledge. So until next time, make sure that when you're out there, you drive safe.